So big welcome to everyone to this webinar. My name is James, the course advisor for the MSc in Data Analytics and Social Statistics course. I'm joined also by Dr. Alexandru Cernat, who is the course director for the Data Analytics and Social Statistics course. It's great to have so many people joining us today. Feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A function throughout the webinar. It would be great to see where people are joining us from, introduce yourself, tell us where you're tuning in from. That would be really nice for everyone to get involved in that. And there's also the Q&A function also that you can use for this webinar to ask any questions about some of the content we are going to cover today. So I'll just give a quick rundown of what we're going to look at today and a quick introduction to Alex. So Dr. Cernat is joining us today, and he is an associate professor in social statistics at the University of Manchester with research areas in longitudinal data, data quality, which is one of the topics we'll be talking about today. And he's also the course director for this MSc in Data Analytics and Social Statistics. So Alex, would you like to just give a little bit more background about yourself for our audience today?
Yeah, so actually my background is in sociology and social policy analysis, and then I did a PhD in survey methodology at the University of Essex, and then I've been in Manchester for a couple of years now. Working mostly teaching at the master's level and also supervising PhD students. And I was also before involved in the data science masters we have here. And then I do lots of research on kind of data quality in surveys, in new forms of data. And, you know, I work with people from all over the world looking at these kind of topics.
That's great. Thank you for that. So yeah, today's webinar rundown then, we are going to be talking a little bit about new data and new problems. So investigating the quality of digital data. We'll also then open it up for a Q&A for everyone to ask any questions about this topic. And then also I'll give a quick introduction to our online MSc in Data Analytics and Social Statistics for anyone who is interested in studying with us at the University of Manchester. So I'll hand over to you again, Alex, for your presentation on new data, new problems.
Well, thank you. Let's see if we can, if I can change the slides. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so thank you for that. So I'm just going to present some research I'm doing with some colleagues. So here are some names. So again, this is a very international collaboration. We have some colleagues from Germany and some colleagues from the Netherlands working on this. And this is kind of a bigger project. We've been working, I guess, for a few years now. We started thinking about the idea, and finally we managed to collect the data, and we're starting to analyze it. And I really think this is very exciting, new type of research in this area of survey research and data quality. And I think it highlights quite nicely the kind of things you can do in this area. So we start with kind of looking at social media and how people use social media and the impact of that. So there's lots of research in different fields. So from political science to communication science to sociology, social media gets more and more attention. So for example, in political science, people might be interested to know, if you consume more social media, you might be more likely to support a right-wing party, or be more or less likely to vote, or be more or less likely to engage in community activities. So, this kind of interaction with technology can impact different sides of our lives. And traditionally in social sciences and political science communication studies, what people have done, they have used surveys and self-reports. So the way that works is we would just ask a pool of people, let's say 1,000 people, how often they use social media, and that would be the kind of data we would use. But with the rise of new technology, there are kind of alternative ways in which we can actually investigate that and collect data about that. Like I said, traditionally, we would collect data using surveys, and these have some nice advantages. So there's a statistical theory that we can use to make representative samples. So we can use probability selection of the individuals, and then we can make inferences about the general population. So that's how it's possible, to interview 2,000 people and say something about 20 million or 80 million or 100 million. Also, the nice thing is that you can design the questionnaire. So you can decide how to interview people, who to select, how to ask the questions, and so on. Another big advantage is that we can ensure that we have long-term comparability. So we can compare data today with questions we asked maybe 50 years ago, because we know that we use the same design for this long period, and we can do these long-term comparisons. But we also know there's a lot of research showing that this kind of data has lots of weaknesses. So if I ask you how much you used your phone yesterday, it's very hard for you to remember how often you did that. So if we have things that are high frequency, it's very hard to ask people and for people to remember how much they did a particular thing. So most of the time we ask for just kind of approximation. So do you feel you use it a lot, or how many times approximately you used it in a day? So the data we get is fragmentary and discrete. So we can't really get data continuously because it's very high burden. So it's a lot of work for respondents to give us that data. And also we know there's issues with measurement error. So we ask people for example, about social media use, but maybe they don't remember. So that's one type of error. Maybe they don't want to say how much they use it. So that's another type of error, something called social desirability. Maybe they will just tell you whatever you want to hear. So the survey ends as soon as possible and so on. So we know surveys are not perfect. A new type of data, which we call digital trace data, or also digital meter data, is quite interesting. So the way this works is you install an app on your phone, and the app kind of collects information passively about how you use your phone. So you to know when you opened the app, when it was closed. You wouldn't know what you did in the app. So there's safeguards regarding privacy, but you don't know how often you used it. And it could also measure, for example, the websites you visit or the Google searches that you have put in your phone. So depending on the app you use, it can collect more or less data, and depending on the agreement with the user. Also, you could install things like that on PC. So, for example, you could ask people to install a plugin on their browser, and that would also collect information about the websites they visit. So using this digital trace data or digital meter data, we say that we can get direct measurement because we can actually measure, the second when a person opened a social media app, how long they stayed on it, and when they closed it, and the same, when they opened the website and when they closed it. It's also relatively low burden because once you install the app, in principle, users don't need to do anything else. Yeah, so they don't need to answer annoying questions about things they don't remember anymore. And the data we get is very detailed and high frequency. So you could get thousands of interactions with the phone every year, all the apps people use, and so on. So it's very detailed and it's high frequency because we know at the second level what they're doing. There's some disadvantages with this data as well. So normally this data is collected on a smaller sample, so they might be students or a small pool of people. So a lot of the previous studies kind of use just small populations that install these apps, and they follow what they're doing. Also, it's technology dependent. So, some colleagues from Statistical Netherlands, for example, spent a lot of time developing an app, and then when they were preparing to launch it, there was a change in the operating systems for Android and Apple, and then it didn't work as expected anymore. So, technology changes very fast. So these meters might work or might not work at a certain point. Similarly, for example, more and more apps have issues working in the background because, Android might want to save battery life, and they might start closing the tracker and so on. And then we also have measurement error. So people could close the tracker if they are doing sensitive things with their phone and they don't want to be tracked. Multiple people could use the same phone. people could use other devices, so they could use a different phone or a different computer to use social media. So these data are also not perfect. They also have different types of measurement error. And finally, kind of a new source of data that is really exciting is called data donation. And this is a result partially of GDPR. So GDPR is this European legislation on data protection. And this, one of the things that this legislation says is that if a platform has information about you, they should make that information available to the user. So that means that platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Google, they should have a way in which you can ask for your data. So you can actually go to facebook.com/DIY and you can ask to download your own data. So you can see what Facebook knows about you. And most platforms have something like that. And what people are doing now, they're developing platforms in which people, users might download their own data and they might donate it to researchers for science. So colleagues from the Netherlands and from Spain are working on some platforms where we can ask people, oh, could you download this data from Facebook, and are you willing to donate it to these researchers from UK or the Netherlands in order to understand behavior around Facebook or Twitter or a different platform. So this is really exciting because it kind of empowers the users. The users get their own data and they can do whatever they want with it. And some of them, they might decide that they're willing to share it with researchers. So this is very new kind of exciting work that is happening in this area. So there's some advantages of this. So we get direct access to the data. So we assume that, for example, Facebook knows best about how many times you use Facebook. So it doesn't really matter what platform you use, how you connect, they will know if you use the platform or not. The nice thing is that it works with any platform because this platform centralizes all the information. So Google knows every time you maybe you're on YouTube or you search for something on Maps, as long as you're logged in. So it works in all the platforms. And also users control the data. So, and a lot of these platforms that are being developed, users can decide what information to share. Platforms can do some things to anonymize the information before it goes to the researchers and so on. There are some disadvantages. So it's quite complicated to download the data. I don't remember. In our research, I think we had like 15, 20 steps to go download it, upload it, rename the file, and so on. So it can be complicated. We're working on this to make it easier and easier, but it is an effort to get this data. It can also be difficult to link it with other data. So if we want to, link a survey with data donation, it can be a little complicated to do, at least currently. And again, it's not user-friendly at this point in time. Okay, so our question was, which is the best way to measure social media use? So traditionally we're using surveys, but then we have these alternative data sources and we don't know, which one is the best. A lot of people in political science, communication science are saying, well, digital trace data is the gold standard. And we're not really convinced about that because, like I mentioned before, it also has issues. And a lot of people prefer to ignore it because they have lots of data and they assume it's better. But we were a little more skeptical about it, and we want to develop a design in which we empirically test that. And why is this important? So here, what I'm showing are some analysis where we try to explain different outcomes. So for example, if somebody has political interest, attitudes towards inequality, attitudes towards gender, attitudes towards climate, attitudes towards assimilation of immigrants. And here, the predictors are social media use, so Facebook use. And we have two sources. So either the digital trace data from phones and PCs or survey data. So these are the dot is the coefficient. So this coefficient will say, based on the survey, there's a relationship between Facebook use and political interest. The more Facebook you use, the more politically interested you are. So that's what the survey says, but the tracking data says, no, that's not true. Actually, there's no effect, or the effect is slightly negative. So depending on the data you use, you have different conclusions. And this is why it's so important. So a similar result with climate attitudes. So the survey says the more Facebook you use, then the more positive your climate attitudes. But the tracking data says, no, that's not true. So then which one is correct? And it's really important to figure out how best to use this data, because basically we have different conclusions based on the data we use. So this is why it's really kind of important to understand the data quality and understand, okay, what are the issues and what's the best way to use this different type of data. So I'm going to show you kind of a little bit our design, which is, we collected some data from Germany from around 2,000 people. So we have 3 surveys. So these are online surveys. We invited these 2,000 people to do a survey online. It took around 10 minutes. It had different questions about political use, social media use, and so on. And we did this at 3 different points in time. So these are these circles here. So the first one was 29th of 8th, 2021, and then the last one, the 4th of 10th in the same year. At the same time, for these individuals, we were tracking their phone, and we knew about the apps they were using and the websites they were visiting on their phone. So we had, for the same people, the information they told us about in the survey, but also we had information from their phone with what actually they were doing based on this digital trace data. And for some of them, we also knew what they were doing on their computer. So some people installed these plugins so we could follow what the websites they were using on the computer. And then at the end, we had another small survey, and then we asked people to donate data. So these were just a few questions, and then we said, well, can you go through this process, and can you download your Facebook data and donate it to us? Yeah, so, and when they downloaded the data, they covered the last 3 months. So basically, we knew what they did on Facebook based on the real Facebook data for these people that agreed. Okay, so basically, we have information about Facebook use from the surveys, from their phones and computers, and from Facebook. So we have the same information from 3 different sources. So we wanted to figure out, okay, do they agree or not? Which one is better? And so on. So we just want to understand this data better. So we did some kind of more complicated statistical modeling. I'm not going to go into it. It's called latent class modeling. And this is a way in which you can identify classes of people. So it's like cluster analysis. So you make a classification of individuals. And what we did is basically we use the Facebook data from the survey and from the tracking. And we want to see if there are people where these 2 data sources agree, and if there are data where they don't agree. And this is how the results look like. And the way to read them is that on the top, we have 3 classes of people. So for example, the first class represents around 48% of the sample, the second class, 43%, the last class around 30%. So let's start actually with the last, let's start with the last one. So in the last one, there's this, if you're in this class, you're very likely to say in the survey that you don't use Facebook a lot. Yeah, so you have a high chance to answer one of these categories. And also in the Facebook tracking data, you are likely to say the same thing. So for this class, these are people that don't use Facebook, and the survey and the digital trace data, they agree on that. Yeah. In the second class, around 43%, these are heavy users of Facebook. So we see that if they're in this class, they're very likely to say that they use Facebook daily or several times a day. And also it agrees with the tracking data. So again, these are heavy Facebook users, and the data agrees. The survey and the digital trace data agrees. The last class, this class number 1 here, this is a more interesting class, because based on the survey, it appears that they use Facebook all the time. So, you know, they're very likely to use it daily or several times a day. But based on the digital trace data, it says that, well, they don't use Facebook a lot. So this class of people, almost 40% of the sample, the survey and the digital trace data, they don't agree. And the question is, which one do you trust? You know, which one is correct? And we did some more analysis, and what we found, well, which is kind of surprising, is actually the survey is closer to reality. So what we did is we used the donated data from Facebook, and we try to understand which one is close to that, because we think that, you know, Facebook really knows how much you use Facebook. So that's kind of the gold standard. And what we found is that indeed these people that the survey says they're heavy users, they really are heavy users based on the Facebook data. And what we think is happening is that these people basically, for some reason, we don't collect the data from the trackers on the phones and the computers. And we found that if we only track either the phone or the PC, they're more likely to be in that class. So that means that probably people are using multiple devices. So they might have multiple phones or multiple computers. They use Facebook and the tracker just doesn't get it because they don't cover all the devices people use. So this would indicate that actually the digital trace data, which we consider perfect, not really perfect unless you manage to track all the devices people use, which sometimes can be a lot depending on the user. Then what we did is we did the same analysis like before, where we looked at these different outcomes with tracking and survey. But then we looked only at these two classes where the digital trace data and the survey agreed. So we ignore class one where they don't agree. And we see that if we do that, for most cases, it kind of brings the conclusions closer to each other. So it's typically somewhere between the survey and the tracking data. So, there's still some differences. They're not identical, but one explanation why these two data sources don't agree seems to be that we're not tracking all the devices for the people with the digital trace data. And also it seems that is incorrect, that leads to the wrong conclusions about how much they use Facebook. Okay. So some conclusions. So digital trace data is super exciting because it can be very precise. We have lots of information, but we would argue that it's far from perfect. It's not the gold standard. It has limitations, and we really need to take those into account. And one way to go forward would be to combine these different data sources. So we're working on statistical models where you can combine, for example, trace data and survey data in order to get better estimates. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alex, for that. That's some really interesting topics you've touched on there. We'll open up to a Q&A now for our audience to ask any questions that they have about some of the topics we've covered there. Feel free to either use the chat function or the Q&A function as well for that. We'd welcome all questions for that. I think there has been some come through, so we'll look at these. So I think we'll go for this question about relating to issues of using social media data. So I think a lot of people in our audience might be working in the public sector, in a public sector role, looking at social statistics, for example, if they want to move into that career. So what are some of the issues with using social media data in this sector?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, there are, so a few years ago, for example, we're working with ONS, who was trying to use, for example, Twitter to understand people's attitudes for different types of policy. So there is interest in that area. And the same, for example, the Manchester Council was trying to make kind of a tracker of attitudes in Manchester by using things like Twitter. And I think, that could have potentially they could be useful because in principle, every day you could find out what people think, but they have some issues. So first of all, a lot of these platforms are very selective. So we choose Facebook because a lot of people tend to use Facebook as well, but they, different platforms have different demographics. So maybe Facebook users are older now, Instagram users might be younger, Twitter users, there's a smaller proportion, they might be more educated or they might be clustered in certain professions. So one issue, you have this selectivity, and this is really problematic from a policy point of view. So if you want to base your policy only on Twitter users, well, that can be quite problematic if you think, well, I don't know, these are certain people and maybe the people that are underrepresented, I don't know, maybe they don't have internet or they don't use Twitter, they don't have a say, and that could be, very problematic for democracy. There are other issues like for Twitter, especially there are bots and things like that you need to take into account. So not everything you see is real data or correct data, and there are algorithms, to detect bots, but also the people that do the bots are also improving. So it's kind of this continuous battle of identifying and creating bots. Then the other issue is just literally accessing this data. So for example, with Facebook, you can't really access it except with this data donation. At a certain point, they were discussing they had the API at a certain point, which was closed down. They were discussing to open a new one, which they didn't in the end. Twitter might disappear, or currently there's an API, but it might not work in the future if something changes. And also the data they collect might change, or the users that from the platforms might change in time, which might make it problematic to do comparisons in time. So there's no guarantee that in 2 years from now, these platforms will exist, or they will work in the same way, or they will have the same audience. So it's, again, if you want to think more long term, it can be problematic because you don't have any say in accessing this data and the format of this data, or who produces it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been quite an interesting question come through about you mentioned this, the survey data in your research there. So it was talking about different topics of their views on certain topics. Was it a case of in the survey data, or is this a conclusion that you maybe can't reach or could conject? Is that did people in the survey sort of see themselves differently compared to how the data in the tracking data saw them? So did people in the surveys think that they had these values, but actually the tracking data showed something different in their values?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's some debate if we should give people some information. So the idea would be to give them feedback, and maybe a little less with this kind of data, but especially in health. So if you do surveys where you collect, let's say, blood pressure, one thing you could say to motivate people to participate is to give them blood pressure, is to give them feedback. But then always the concern is, well, if they change their behavior, are they still, kind of a representative element of the population, or did you just change them because you literally, you told them, okay, maybe your heart rate is too high, they're going to change their behavior. If you interview them again in a year, they're a total different person because of that experience. So in our study, we didn't really give users feedback, so they don't know if the two agree. We did this kind of analysis where we know for these people, they don't agree. And it's often very hard to figure out which one is correct. So if people tell us something and other people tell us something else, it's often very hard to say which is the truth. So for us, we think the real Facebook data from the platform is the correct data, but it's not. Yeah, often it's, I don't know, if I ask about your attitudes about the environment, it's very hard to say, well, what is the truth? How could I extract that from you? Even if I could maybe look at what you say on social media, what you say in the survey, and try to compare them, it's very hard to say, well, which of those is closer to the truth.
Yeah, for sure. There's a question here in the chat asking about AI, and are there any ways AI could be used to streamline the analysis of digital trace data?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So especially with kind of the new AI platforms or algorithms developed now, there's kind of a lot of interest to see how we use them. So one interesting direction is that a lot of this AI, including Chat GPT, they could create code for you. So you could say, well, can you give me some R code to do this? And they would create some R code for you. Yeah, from my colleagues, from what I know, it's with mixed results. So they could help you, but also they can give you stuff that doesn't work, and then you need to figure out why it doesn't work. And also, I think we're at the stage where you need to know what's happening. So if you need to understand the code and to be critical of it, and if it doesn't work, to fix it. So it might be useful. So for things like auto-completing your code and things like that. So there are more and more platforms, including GitHub and platforms for writing code that have this autocomplete, or kind of guessing what you want to do next based on this kind of AI. But if you want to do more than that, and you say, okay, I'm not going to hire a consultant, I'm just going to ask this AI to create all this code to do all of these things, I don't think currently it can do that. So a colleague of mine was trying this the other day, and he was finding that, okay, the code wasn't working, and then he was trying to figure out why, and it was referring to some data you can't access. Some of the code was incorrect. So I think it's limited. There's potential there, so I think it can help us. It can help us be more productive with autocompletes or giving a first draft of ideas, or give you some ideas where you're stuck. So that could be potential things that could help you. But at this point, we're kind of far away from replacing us as coders and just doing everything. The other thing is this kind of work is complicated. So I don't know, doing this analysis, probably I have thousands of lines of code where you need to make different decisions. And those decisions are really important, like, oh, do we keep these people or not? Or is this type of app a social media app? And it's, you need to be expert in the field to make those decisions, and you need to talk to other people to make those decisions. Especially as researchers or in policy, I would be very reluctant to leave an AI to make all of those decisions for you, because again, you might get very wrong results and then you don't really know why. But thank you for that. That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's well, it's good to hear that it can have a supportive role, but it's not going to be replacing anyone anytime soon.
For now, don't quote me on it.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, I think there's just one more question here about, so you mentioned about incomplete data from social media platforms. So is it still possible to use incomplete social media data to make projections, make forecasts about related topics? How accurate would it be using this data?
Yeah, so there's some interesting work being done in this area. So there were initially some very exciting articles where people were predicting election results based on Twitter, and everybody started doing it. Like, oh, this is super exciting. But then when you look at it, you see that, well, not really. You can be very selective. You can try lots of things, and then you can select the model that predicts what you want to predict based on the outcome that you already know. So I think, and some colleagues, for example, from Michigan, they were looking, can we replace Twitter to find out like the sentiment about employment or the proportion of people that are employed? So to replace surveys with this kind of Twitter data. And again, mixed results are found so far. So some people found that you can do that, but there are lots of decisions involved, and it's not clear that sometimes if you change one of the decisions, let's say, who should be selected? Is it everyone, or should you include the retweets or not? So these kind of small decisions can lead to a different conclusion. And it's not clear that your algorithm now will work next year when maybe there'll be a different audience on Twitter. So there's always this risk that, the prediction model might work now and might not work in the future. And then kind of related to your question is also the social media data and also digital trace data is very exciting, but it's very limited in the sense that it doesn't have contextual information. And this is, I think, where surveys are very exciting, because we can ask about, your background, your age, your interest in politics, if you voted or not. So we know a lot more things around that. So it may be less precise, but we have more context. So one kind of interesting area is to put these data sets together, to have this very precise, maybe social media, digital trace data, and then this contextual information from surveys. And I think that would be like a really interesting direction in which this field is going to.
Yeah, certainly the context is key, isn't it? It almost maybe links back to the question about AI, and I think we've all sort of played around with ChatGPT before and things, and you really have to give it the context to get some good quality content from it when you use it. So I guess that's possibly the area where an AI would lack when doing this kind of data. They wouldn't have the context, so it would be pretty critical for any developments there. But that's really interesting. There was just a follow-up question about when you were talking. I think you were answering it. So it was just, is this are you relating this talking about sentiment analysis?
Some of these models that were doing predictions, they were using sentiment analysis. And again, there's now some research showing that, well, depending on the algorithm you use and different lexicons and things like that, you can have different conclusions. So again, it's not that straightforward. But yeah, sentiment analysis is one of the methods used, especially when you have this kind of text data from social media and you want to analyze it.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Alex. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll just move on to our online MSc and just give you a little bit more information about that program. But if you do have any other questions, feel free to ask and we can circle back round and answer those. So as mentioned before, Alex is the course director for our online data analytics and social statistics MSc. I'm also the course advisor for that, so you can get in contact with me for any questions about that and how to apply to that program. So I'll just give you a little rundown of this program for anyone that's interested in applying. So we offer an MSc and also a PG diploma option for this. And the PG diploma runs for 18 months and the full master's program runs for just over 2 years. And this is an online part-time program. So we recommend that you do about 20 hours of work per week on this. And you can do it alongside a job. It's really flexible. The content will be available at all times throughout the day. And so it's really good to be able to work it alongside your job and also in any time zone if you're in different areas around the world. It's really flexible for people living in different time zones. So our next enrollment for this program is in September. So you can apply now for that program. And the fees are for the master's program are £15,500, and for the PG diploma they're £10,333. We also currently offer a 10% early application discount. So if you apply within the next couple of weeks, you will qualify for that discount. I think the deadline is 26th of June. So make sure you get your application submitted before that deadline to qualify for that 10% discount. Welcome any questions about the course in this webinar, but also you can contact me at studyonline@manchester.ac.uk and you can ask any of your questions there, or we can arrange a private consultation over the phone, or we can set up a Zoom meeting and we can discuss the course further, fees, application process, that kind of thing. So feel free to ask any questions there. I think that there is some questions coming through in the Q&A and the chat. So I'll start with the Q&A function. So it says here, when using data as part of the course, will students be able to use data sets related to their field? So I guess this is probably talking about the field that they're currently working in. So how would it relate in the course?
Yeah, so we have a mixed of things. So for a lot of assignments or practicals, we might give some data and we use data that is very popular, mostly social science data. And then for assignments, for some assignments, we say what data you should use. So we say maybe use the European Social Survey, this particular wave. For other assignments, we say, well, just use whatever data you want to answer this particular research question or to use this particular method. So you have a combination. For the most part, we use social data, and that could be, sociology, criminology, economics, and so on. So it's very broad. Most social science topics will be covered with the data we have, but also you can use your own data. And for the dissertation, for sure, you can use your own data. So there you develop your own project, and you can use whatever data you want, whatever research question you want. And really, in general, my advice is to find something that is really interesting and relevant for you, especially given this is part-time and you work in your own pace. And that way you're more motivated to do it, and it's you're more likely to learn and you're more likely to remember what you're doing as well. So for the dissertation, for sure, you can use also your own data and your own research questions.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Alex. There's also some questions in the chat that relate to the previous topic we were just talking about. So there's a question here that says, how do you ensure leadership or stakeholder support for data studies when they may be unconvinced in the results, in that the results are contingent on what kind of data or what platform, etc., as discussed?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple of things. First, you should think what's the current state of play and how your proposal could improve things. So if you don't use any data at all, is it better to use some imperfect data to know what's happening? So, and like for example, I'm a big supporter of probability surveys, but there are situations where non-probability surveys and small samples are fine, right? If we just want to test a product or just have an idea what's happening, you might not need a representative sample of 2,000 people. You might need 30 people to try out your product and see if it works. And you could use social media or some of these platforms in the same way. You could say, well, given what is the data that we have and what can we get with this other data? And maybe that will be valuable, even if that data is not particularly, it's not perfect. So that's one thing. Then I think probably it's a good idea to look at other examples. Are other people, other institutions using this kind of data? How are they using it? If you have some kind of evidence of how it improved things in the organization, or if you can make a good argument how things would be improved by using that kind of data, that would be another way to sell it. In that sense, I don't think it's necessarily different from posing any change in our organization. So you need to find out the stakeholders that are involved, try to argue very well what's involved, and be very clear what are the costs and advantages in your proposal.
That's great. Thank you for that, Alex. Yeah, and thank you for all of those questions, everyone. That pretty much brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you very much for attending. Alex, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your research today. That's really beneficial. I think that our audience today will really appreciate that. If you are interested in learning more about some of these topics, then definitely check out our MSc in Data Analytics and Social Statistics online course, where you can learn a lot more about these in greater depth. And you can contact me at studyonline@manchester.ac.uk to learn more about that course. But yeah, thank you for joining. Thanks again, Alex, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Okay.